Good afternoon, everyone. We now turn to a roundtable discussion. I'm Gavin Dingwall. I'm Professor of Criminal Justice in the School of Law. Joining me is Michael Campbell. Michael is a consultant to the criminal justice system who's been making a series of films with the law school. And my colleague Jessica Gallagher also teaches in the School of Law, also in the area of penology and criminal justice. The questions we're going to ask today are questions which have been put to us by students. There's a whole variety of different topics, and Michael's going to have to earn that cup of coffee we just bought him. Okay, let's start, Michael, with three questions which are on a
Is this like Mastermind?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
there's a black chair. And I go,
You get to sit in the black chair.
Okay, go for it.
You're allowed how many passes?
yeah, I'll give as many passes as I can possibly get.
You forget this is your specialist subject.
It is. It's sad. Prisons. Your special subject?
Okay.
Prisons. Go.
Right, the first one then.
Yes.
These are variations on a theme.
Yep.
Okay. Do you think your life would be better or worse if you hadn't received the punishment you did for the crimes you committed? Would you be a better or worse person? Did you leave prison a better man?
Wow. The first one, it's a weird question because the punishment that I received for the crimes that I committed. No, is the answer to that. I committed the crimes and therefore I should have been committed to jail. So the punishment I was given was within the law. Was it the right amount of punishment? By the law, yes. But was I better served, or was society better? Was I better served by the punishment? Yes. Was society better served by sending me to jail? You'd have to ask society that one. That's a difficult question. So the average cost for a prisoner where I was located was £37,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So you've got basically £150,000 of your taxpayers' money spent putting me in jail. Was that worthwhile? I can't answer that question. That's the law that needs to answer that question. What was the second one?
The second one's about you. Did you leave prison a better man?
100%. I left prison a better man than entered it. Did I leave prison a better man than entered it because of the punishment? No. I took the time when I was in jail to go through my own kind of metamorphosis, to deconstruct myself and try and find the good person that people said that was in there that I had lost for a while. So I used my time in jail to my own advantage, to become a better person. So did I need the 4.5 years to do that? Well, yeah, actually I did. My sentence was split over 2 different sentences. The first sentence I got was for a charge of perjury, which I was given for 2 years incarceration. That prison sentence didn't work. I didn't have enough time to change.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I wasn't...
It's a controversial view, because it's
Yeah.
a view for
It is.
extending sentence length.
It is. And it's not just me. Look at the statistics. Look at the statistics of people who reoffend, who are sentenced to 12 months or less in prison, and look at that recidivism rate. And that recidivism rate is in the high 60s. Because you sentence me to jail for a year, or for 2 years, for example, I would do a year in custody and a year on license in the community. But if I'm well enough behaved, then I can apply for home detention curfew or a tag. So that takes a further 3 months off my sentence. So now I'm actually only doing 9 months in custody. No, that wasn't enough time. The larger sentence that I got, which was for the 4 years, yeah, that was sufficient time for me. Thank you very much. But no, that's the sentence that started to change my life around. So I still had that arrogance and all that stuff that went with the crimes that I committed during that first year. It wasn't enough to shed the skin, if you want. It was, no, and I noticed it. I noticed that whilst I was writing to people when I was leaving jail, I was going back to them.
Between the first and the second?
For the first sentence. When I was leaving, I noticed that arrogance coming back again. So the answer has to be no, it wasn't. The longer sentence is the one that changed my life. So it is, shockingly, rather controversial. I know I'm not seen as a controversial person. But the longer sentence is the one that actually
did it.
And yes, to answer to whoever asked the question, yeah, it changed me, and it changed me for the better.
Okay, I'm going to put a question. It's a fairly lengthy question from one of the students, Michael, but it touches upon this thing about having a uniform approach and individuals having to perhaps apply their own. I have an immense aversion to the educational system in terms of it being no longer fit for purpose. And I strongly believe that the concept that one size fits all is absolutely outmoded. From a realistic point of view, and despite outward appearances, the model does not take into consideration any factors of the individual, such as personality, ability, underlying mental health conditions, for example. Comparing this to the penal system, does Michael agree or disagree that the prison system is outdated as it also adopts a one-size-fits-all model, which frustrates and impedes deterrence and rehabilitation?
Thanks for coming up for air. I could turn around and go, yes, and then that would be the answer. But I won't. I can't talk about the education system. That's not part of my bag, and
that's fine.
Nothing to do with education on the outside. I have a bit to do with education on the inside, but not on the outside. One size fits all. I don't think the prison system is one size fits all, because we have the different categories of prison. So we have A cats, B cats, C cats, and D cats. A cats being the most secure of the jails. B category jails are either remand jails where you're sent from the court on remand. C cats are usually the training prisons, and D cat is the opening state. The actual way the categorization works is it's based on, really weird, it's based on your ability to escape.
It's how dangerous you would be if you escaped.
And it's also how the ability you have to escape.
Also how good you could be.
Yeah, so I know that in Belmarsh, where it's double A cat, there are fraudsters sitting inside that jail. They're not a danger to society as in physically attack people, but they have the wherewithal to escape. So I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all inside the prison estate. Is it outdated and outmoded? 100%. In my first lecture, I talked about the three things that Oscar Wilde had said about prison in 1898, which was disease, hunger, and insomnia. And 120 years later on, it's still the same thing. So I kind of say at that point that they are a bit out of date. I think that the prison tries to put you into a pigeonhole.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So the staff themselves understand that it's not cookie cutter. They understand that there are highly educated people in prison. There are people that are in prison for white collar crimes. There are people that are in prison for heinous offences. But they still try and pigeonhole you and say, okay, you fit that thing. And my argument is always going to be is that a prisoner is a human being first and a prisoner second. So you have to tailor make the prison life or the prison journey for that prisoner. So the answer has to be, yeah, it's 100% outdated. It's not modern. I can tell you it's not modern. There's 116 cells inside the prison system right now that don't have in-cell sanitation. So you have to use a bucket. Well, that went out in the 1970s after the Strangeways riots, or 1980s after the Strangeways riots. So that makes it outdated, doesn't it? So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, the fact of, I'm answering it as an individual.
Sure.
But you're asking me to answer whether it's cookie cutter. I am lucky where I use the voice of 80,000 prisoners. And I talk as 80,000 prisoners, but you'd need to ask, the person who asked the question would need to go ahead and ask 80,000 other people.
Okay, now turning away then from your experiences of being a prisoner to somebody that works in the prison system.
Yes.
How can you individualise it?
I individualise it, in certainly the ones that I work in the jails, is that I make it individual. So I talk or have my fellow peer mentors, the prisoners that we train inside the prison, talk to the prisoner individually. So what my worries are when I enter jail are not the worries that you're going to have. So we try and identify what these worries are. So you do make it more individualised. I specialise in early days in custody. So when I develop an early days in custody program, I make it an individual program. So it's a case of me talking to you one-on-one. So yes, you have the ability to do it.
Okay. Do you want to come in with one of yours, Jessica?
Some of mine are a little bit more about life within prison, which I think is quite fascinating for a lot of people that don't.
Okay.
So these are, first question, can you wear contact lenses in prison, or do you have to wear glasses? So can you keep your contact lenses? Do they get prescribed? What happens there?
No, we don't prescribe contact lenses in prison. You can wear your own contact lenses if you have that prescription. But here's the rub. You usually have to buy the solutions yourself.
Which you need quite a lot of as well.
So which you need quite a lot of. So there is optician services inside the jails. You can apply to see an optician. I used to tell people when I was doing induction, when I gave the induction chat, I used to say to people when they arrived into prison, okay, first things first, make an appointment to see the dentist, make an appointment to see the optician, and make an appointment to see the doctor. And they would go to me, yeah, but I don't have toothache. And I go, by the time you see the dentist, you're going to have toothache. So it's the same. It takes, in several prisons, it'll take 6 to 9 months to see an optician. They only come in once a week. And if you've got 1,100 prisoners. So the answer to the question is yes, you can wear your own contact lenses. You have to buy the solution yourself. Otherwise, you know what, bite the bullet, go get some glasses.
Yeah. Okay. Regarding living, who decides who a prisoner shares a cell with, and what happens if you don't get on?
We touched on this earlier. That's decided when you come into reception, when you're into the desk. There's a document called Cell Sharing Risk Assessment done. It is based on offence. So there are certain offences that somebody commits or has allegedly committed. That will automatically require them to be in a single cell.
So would things like a racist or homophobic attack warrant that?
Yes, it would. If there's a marker that the person is a racist or is a homophobe, he'll be put into a single cell. If the offence is of a particularly heinous nature, whether it be a sex offence or whether it be murder, then usually you'll get a single cell. If you're looking at a life sentence, you'll be given a single cell. But that isn't decided by you rocking up to the front gate going, I'd like room 13, please. And do I leave my shoes outside to have them polished at night? It's decided by staff. If you don't get along with your cellmate, the standard answer on the company line will be tough, learn how to. But you can always apply to move cells. But you will never apply to basically say a single cell. You tend to get single cells as you move further up the ladder. So as you move up on the incentive and earned privilege scheme, part of that is you'll get your single cell.
Fair enough. Okay, so this might have been something you've experienced, but are there really prisoners who have offended because they prefer to be in prison?
Okay, we can't record for the next 6 hours, which is how long it'll take me to give you the
Exactly,
actual line.
it's quite a big question.
So the answer, yes. Look at, ask any governor what his spaces are going to be like over Christmas and New Year.
People wanting.
So people will go out and offend so that they'll get 3 meals a day. And that's a huge societal issue when somebody feels safer. So there was a great line, Gavin and I spoke about this last night, where
over dinner.
where the where the man's standing in the dock, and it's just before Christmas, and he's been in front of the dock a few times now, and this is his 10th or 11th time, and the magistrate says, you know what, I'm going to show some compassion towards you over this festive period, so I will not remand you to custody. And the defendant in the dock turns around and says, thank you, Judge, you're an absolute bleeping bleep. At which case the judge turns around and says, 14 days. And the guy turns around and says, thank you very much. And goes down to the cell. Well, that's a genuine story.
I can believe it.
So there are certain times when people will offend. The flip side of that is, the more serious answer is, regrettably, in today's age with psychotic substances and NPS and spice and stuff like that, people will offend to be sent to jail in order that they can smuggle drugs into the jail and sell.
I think it's an interesting topic because it almost feeds into this tabloid idea that it's worth going into prison. And I think what you're asking here is the reality of prison only slightly better than being cold on the streets, because you're not walking into a single cell with your shoes outside to be polished and a TV showing your favourite things.
Unfortunately, a lot of these people, it is a better life for them in jail.
But it's not what we would consider to be ideal.
No, it's not a travel lodge.
That's what I'm thinking, because there's all that.
But there is the issue right now of where people are trying to come into jails, full of drugs. so they can sell them, and then knowing they're going to get a short sentence.
Right, can I follow this up? Are they doing this voluntarily, Michael, or are they doing this under duress?
So there's a mixture of both, Gavin. There is the cohort out there that are basically told, you know, a lot of the jails we work in.
Something about like a drug debt.
Yes, it can be.
It off.
It can be. The fact, if you're getting released on Thursday,
Right.
so go out there, go and get this, and this, and then go and get yourself recalled to prison would be the thing. So they're out on licence. They commit an offence that will get them recalled into jail, and then at that point they go back in to pay their debt off.
Right.
The other one is the fact that they go in there to make money, and then there's the societal issue of that the people feel that, you know what, they want to break over Christmas and New Year of living on the streets. So why do we? Every jail in the country is every remand jail in the country is jam-packed over Christmas and New Year, which is, again, that's a different discussion about
It's a
society.
whole mirror on society, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, what is canteen?
Canteen's something you put your water in. No, that's an army thing. So canteen is the prison shop.
Okay.
So whilst you're in prison, you can earn money by working.
Yeah.
You can have money sent in by your family or your friends or your loved ones. There's a limit to how much money you can be sent in, and there's a limit to how much money you can spend in that shop. And it depends whether you're remand or whether you're convicted. If you're convicted, you can spend up to £30 on your canteen. And that is a list, and it varies between different jails. It's usually 2 to 3 pages long, and it goes down from buying Q-tips, if you want to buy Q-tips, to shampoo, to chocolate bars and stuff like that. So the money you earn in jail, you can spend in jail. So to have, I think what the Daily Mail readers would say is life's little luxuries.
It's a corner shop for prison.
Basically, it's exactly what it is.
Fair enough. Okay, from a fairly innocuous question to how serious a problem is radicalisation in prisons?
Oh, God, another 6 hours. I am not the best person to answer that question because I have not personally witnessed it.
Yeah.
There is a gentleman out there called Ian Aitchison who works on this as a specialist.
Yeah.
Radicalisation happens in jails.
Yeah.
To say that it doesn't is a lie. Is it a serious problem? Yes. There has been a case recently in the news where two prisoners wanted to kill and behead a prison officer. They've just been sentenced, actually, in the last couple of weeks about that. So it's a horrendously serious problem.
Yeah.
Not one that's tackled properly.
Is it very hidden?
Yeah, very much so. There was a talk at one point of putting jails together that were for people who would try and radicalise other inmates. So, for the want of a better word, it was like a mini Guantanamo Bay.
Nice.
Nice. Not necessarily a thing that's going to work. There are wings of jails. I can't remember them off the top of my head, so go and check them. But there are certain wings of jails where these prisoners are held.
Yeah.
Because if not, it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
So it is, a fairly serious thing.
Again, when the security services talk about radicalisation, they often say that one of the biggest threats is the far right.
That's an interesting thing.
Is that an issue in prisons?
No, not that I see. So you watch all these programs in America, don't you? Where it's all about the prisons, and there's like the far right organisations and all that. Now, I have never witnessed that in jail. I don't know of any, for the want of a better word, white supremacist organisations. No, I actually don't know any of that existing in jails. The radicalisation starts because on that side of it, it's preying on people who are vulnerable, and therefore the group kind of surrounds them, and therefore the radicalisation starts. But I'm not a specialist in it, so I know that it occurs,
But it's...
and I know it's bad. But have I ever witnessed it in any of the jails that I've ever been in? No, not at all.
Okay, so final question from me on kind of prison life. What support is there for people who don't necessarily have visitors?
There are some wonderful organisations out there where these are wonderful people because they're prison visitors.
They come in and see
So
you,
they come in and see you.
even if you don't
And you have a
family.
visit. And I think that's wonderful. I didn't do a lot of visits when I was in jail. I didn't because I just didn't want to. But, some of the visits centres and some of the visit halls are actually as nice as they can be. But they're good places.
They've made some good, especially for children. I've seen some good
so
examples.
you don't get to see that. So the prisoners that don't have visits don't ever get to see that.
bits.
So some of the jails that I work in, where sometimes the type of events means the family has forgone the individual, I run special mornings for these guys that they can come up into the visits hall.
Okay.
And they can sit and have a coffee morning with each other, but then they get to witness that. The other thing is the organisations out there that actually say, you can write to us and we will allocate you a visitor, and that person will come and see you like once a month.
Yeah.
And they're not there to help you with your case or buy you loads of things off the canteen, but you're there to have a visit if you want one. So the chaplaincy departments and the multi-faith departments inside the jails run these sort of programs. So there is support out there if you want it.
So, and that almost is a good thing, it's your choice, your autonomy to take part in this.
I decided not to,
Yeah.
but that was my decision. If I wanted to, then I could have availed myself of those things.
Do you think that's quite a positive thing for inside a prison, that it can make kind of almost a good day in a prison if you have that opportunity for a visit?
A good day in a prison. Yeah, there's no good days in jail, but it takes you away from the jail for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you on that. It does. People should avail themselves more of it, because you can become quite attached. They become pen pals.
Yeah.
You know, and you can get the visit, and they'll come and see you. It's once a month, or it won't be a regular visit, but it'll give you a break in the routine. That's what
something to look forward to. I
visits
guess.
are sacrosanct.
Yeah.
Don't mess with our visits. There's 3 things you don't mess with us in jail. Don't mess with our canteen. Don't mess with our visits. Don't mess with our gym. Well, the gym didn't exactly work for me, but the other 2 I could get. So these are the things that are sacrosanct.
Yeah.
These are the links to our outside.
Well, I mean, one thing you and I have talked about in the past, Michael, is the physical location of prisons now. We're building prisons in places which is very difficult to get to often, unless you've got a car.
It's horrendous, Gavin. You build a prison in an industrial estate that used to be for making tyres in North Wales, and you send prisoners there from all over the country that are not Welsh, and you expect a family to go and see them. So there are facilities available though. So some of the things that I like to do is specialising in things like that, is looking, because there's so little support for families in jails, and the children of families in jails. There's so little support of them. So I like to do things like saying, okay, you've come all the way to see Gavin, so I tell you what, I'll front the first 10 to 15 pounds that you're going to spend in the prison shop. So at least you don't have to front that out. There is the assisted visit scheme. So if you are on benefits, you can actually apply to have the travel refunded. In the old days, it used to be a bus in the centre of London, and it would be a bus that drove up and you all went up together. It was like a bus of prisoners, you got a bus of prisoners' families. So you had all that sort of stuff. So there is that available, but yes, you're right. The problem is the further away that we build the prisons.
And this presumably is it's obviously a particular issue in the female estate, where there are fewer prisons.
It's horrendous. It doesn't make sense to me. So the upper echelons will sit and say to you that family ties are so vitally important to the rehabilitation. I hate that word, rehabilitation. But
I'll score it out.
Yeah, please, just don't. Please don't use rehabilitation. Don't use resettlement. Just don't. It's just rotten.
Do you have a word you prefer?
Yeah, freedom. No, I don't think, because rehabilitation is not a word that I acknowledge.
Yeah.
Resettlement I have to acknowledge, but rehabilitation is not a word. It's such an arrogant word.
I agree. Yeah.
We have rehabilitated Gavin. Oh well, good for you, mate. I'd like to award this person, but it's just rubbish. So we say this, don't we? We say the family is so important in the rehabilitation of a prisoner, and then we say, but you can only come and see them Monday to Friday, which is when you usually work, between 1 and 2 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it's 70 miles away.
Yeah, correct. And then when you get to the jail, you're going to take half an hour to be processed, and you're going to go and stand in front of a cafe line, because you have to go and buy the goodies for the prisoner, for your loved one, which will take you 25 minutes to do that. So your visit for an hour and a half is now just an hour. You get to say hello, and then you get told it's the end of the visit. No, we need to look at this slightly better. We need to look at where we're placing. If you're going to place individuals in prison, place them close to the family. There used to be a rule years ago that said you weren't allowed to be placed more than 65 miles away from your home.
All right. Okay.
It's still intact actually, but for some reason people aren't paying attention to
And
it.
even within that, to be fair, 65 miles is still a very long way if you don't have a car or...
Heck, if you're in North London and your loved one is over in Belmarsh,
Yeah.
that's still a good 2 hours to come and go. I try and tell that to the lads that I work with in the jails when they sit there and they go. I remember one who was a prison in the north of England, and I was sitting there listening to this guy sound off at his wife, and the guy was on remand. So if you're on remand, you're entitled to a visit every single day.
Yeah.
Because again, you're innocent. If you're convicted, it's about 3 visits a month. But I remember this guy just screaming at his partner, going, "You have to come and see me tomorrow, and you have to come and see me every single day." And I took him aside at the end of it, and I said to him, do you understand that it takes your partner 3 hours to get here and 3 hours to get back? So it's an entire day, and yet she's got 2 kids to deal with and everything else to deal with, and you... No, I never thought about that. Yeah, well, you know what, Sparky? Next time,
Do you think that's quite easy to do though, not out of a place of selfishness, but because prison is so all-encompassing that you forget that it would take your partner 3 hours to travel? It's not out of an unfairness, it's just that you can't appreciate that because your days aren't like that.
You can't appreciate it. It takes you 15 minutes at most to get to the visit centre. You call me from my cell. You got a visit, Michael? Fine.
Yeah.
I'll be down in 10 minutes. Right, cool, on you go. Whereas, you got a visit.
Yeah.
So in my case, where my family lived in Spain, visit takes 3 days. One of the reasons why I didn't do visits is because I didn't want my wife to have to go through that entire rigmarole of all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we need to look at where we're placing them slightly better.
Yeah, I also think one of the issues, I don't know if you both agree, is this sort of idea now that we should be building really big prisons, and then we don't need as many of them. Whereas, in a way, concentrating on smaller facilities, more of them.
Small prisons work. Big prisons don't.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
I think it's arguably a very similar argument to kids get lost in big schools and they don't in small schools. People get lost in big areas. Teaching, we lose students in big cohorts. It's harder to know them individually. It's a lot easier to know someone and know the people around you and know, when your favourite officer's on if you're in a small prison, rather than...
Well, here's the thing though, in a small prison you don't have to worry about your favourite officer because every officer knows you.
Yeah, and they'll look out for you.
I work in a jail in outside Bristol, and it has a role. The amount of people are in it. It's 400 people inside the jail. I walk around that jail and I see the staff interact with every single prisoner because they know every single prisoner. You go into a large monolithic jail like Wrexham or Berwyn is called, HMP Berwyn, you could go to HMP Oakwood, which is the largest jail in the entire country, with 2,100 men. Now, how can you manage that? How do you know that I'm having a bad day? You don't know me from Adam. It takes you 3 hours to walk around the bleeding jail in the first place. So there is that argument. If you're going to build jails, well, for start, don't. But if you're building a jail is an admittance of failure. If you're going to build jails, build them small.
We're talking about, if you like, the experience in the prison here, Michael. And I've been asked about racism in prisons.
Yep.
So first of all, perhaps we could do this in 2 stages. What about racism amongst prisoners?
No. I don't. There is. As there is racism in the community, there will be racism in prison. So it exists. There is still this camaraderie surrounding prisoners. We tend to take care of our own. Where you have problems in a lot of the jails with violence and things like that, you'll actually find that a lot of the violence, I believe, happens in the remand jails. And that is because of a gang issue. So the gang issue is not a race issue, is it? It's just a gang issue. Gangs don't care what colour you are, it's just you're a member of a gang. So I don't actually believe that there's that. This is not the 1970s anymore. Racism exists, absolutely it does, of course it does. And it exists in our prisons. Is it prevalent in our prisons? No, I don't believe it is. For the prisoners against prisoners.
Right, racism by staff.
Yeah, absolutely exists. Yeah, completely. I've witnessed it.
And racism to staff. That's the other.
Racism to staff. So the off-the-cuff answer has to be, nah, we just don't like you because you're an officer. It doesn't matter what colour of skin you've got. It's because you are one of them. And I don't think... You know how things have moved on from the politically incorrect days of the 70s? Where you wouldn't be able to say...
Well, she doesn't. She's too young.
True. God, I'm showing my age. But you, for instance, you would hear somebody in the 70s say, well, that black officer. You can't say that nowadays. Yeah, but prisons haven't moved onward from that. So I don't believe it's sheer and outright racism. I think it's completely politically incorrect stuff that's going on. But regrettably, there are officers out there who are racist. And they have no right to wear the uniform. But sadly, it exists. I've always said, and I've continued to say through these discussions that we have, and the future ones, is that prison is a microcosm of a community. So what you get in the community, you're going to get when you're in jail.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the answer to that. Yeah, unfortunately, it does exist.
Right. We've now made, what, this is our 5th film, Michael?
Yes.
In all of the films, you've used the word we when you're talking about prisoners. Is that conscious, unconscious?
Oh, it's definitely unconscious.
Because bluntly, you're now on the other side of that cell door.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm genuinely not. So the Oscar Wilde quote.
Go on.
I am a prisoner and an ex-prisoner, and I am of their class now, and I always will be. And here's this thing, Gavin. I am honoured to be so. I use my voice for the ones that don't have a voice. The day that I stop saying we as prisoners means I can't relate to prisoners anymore. And I am never more at home than when I'm sitting talking to my fellow prisoners. And I say my fellow prisoners because I work in these prisons, because I'm one of them. I am not a prison officer. I'm certainly not a governor. I am not a third-party charitable organisation, as great as these organisations are, that works in prisons. I use my experience of being a prisoner to be the voice of these guys and these ladies. So I subconsciously say we, and I would ask anybody to come to me the minute I stop saying it. Because the minute I stop saying we, I've lost contact, and I can be of no further use. So I say we, and I say fellow prisoners, and I have absolutely no issue with it.
Okay, this is one which a student's asked this one, and I don't know if this is a dig at Jessica, Tim and I, or if this is, I'll be interested in how you
This is
deal
going to
with
be
this.
interesting.
Okay, do academics understand criminal justice?
Oh, yes, they do. Do they understand jail? No. So anybody that studies criminal justice understands criminal justice. But everybody who studies prisons doesn't understand prisons. I think there's a big difference in that. I have never studied criminal justice. I have never studied prisons, but I've lived them. So it's the same as, does a prison officer understand prisons? Yeah, from one side. But my side of the door is so much more valuable because I can tell you where you're going to go wrong. I have the experience of that. So if you're an academic, can you understand prisons? You can understand the methodology of prisons. You can maybe understand the philosophy of a prison, the reason why there is prisons. But can you understand prison life? Nobody can, unless they've been there. That's why I do what I do. So I think that there is a need for academia inside prisons and inside the criminal justice system because it raises questions. And that's always going to be a good thing, and it's always going to be a welcome thing. But don't do what a prison officer tried to do with me 2 weeks ago. And don't ever say to me, you know how I feel. Because you just don't. I had a prison officer who's been in the job for 20 years in a prison near here say to me 2 weeks ago, he knew exactly what it was I felt when I went to jail. You don't have a bleeper long enough for what my answer was to him, but you can imagine.
But it's something we discussed, is the idea of how can we as academics come across well, is going to be the term I use when talking to those who are in prison, because it's two very different sides. And for those of us that don't have that experience in prison, it's being able to talk without offending and saying, I know how you feel, because we so clearly don't.
What's your concern?
We discussed this earlier. The term I'm going to use is, I don't want to offend someone. I've never been in prison, I've never been sentenced, but I know a lot of the theory, and that's not the same. I'm self-aware enough to know that it will never be the same. But the question I asked to Michael earlier was, how can I best balance that so that I don't come across as almost above them, because that's not how I feel, but I don't want to come across that way with my body language and the way I speak.
Sure.
We're used to people coming into jails and asking us questions. How do you feel about this? What do you think about that? What would have stopped you from offending? And all this stuff. We're used to that. And what happens is prisons usually just wheel out the ones that are going to be engaging.
Yeah.
So they'll wheel out to you.
The school council of prison.
There you go.
Yes, I was going to say, we do the same.
Yeah.
So I beg that you do one thing, is you tell the governor that that's not who you want to talk to. Tell the governor you want to talk to the guy who's not engaging, because he's got opinions too. So the answer to that is really simple, Jessica. Be honest with us. Say to us, listen, I can't tell you how you're feeling. I'd like to learn though, and we'll open up to you. We're starved of people to talk to.
Yeah.
We genuinely are. So if somebody shows a genuine interest in us, so that's what I would say to you. Be honest. Say to them, listen, I'm an academic. I'm here to see what I can do in the future to make people's lives better. We understand that when you come to talk to us, Jessica, you're not going to make our life better. You genuinely aren't. You may want to, but you're not. So go to the fact of, listen, I want to make the people who come after you, I want their life to be better by learning from your experience. Hence the reason why I do what I do. My job is to make people, ensure that people are treated better than I was when I went to jail. And if you do things like that, it's not that you're academics. We don't understand that word, that's fine. I don't care. You're a human being, and you're genuine interest. Show us interest. Be who you are, Jessica. Be decent. Show humanity, and we'll open up.
You interact, of course, with academics.
I do.
So how do you find it? How do you find us?
Oh, I can't abide a lot of you.
Oh, dear.
I can't abide a lot of you. Because, so yes, I do. I engage with you and with Tim and with Jessica and with other renowned academics throughout it. The minute I feel, or the minute I felt, that you or any academic I came in front of didn't have a genuine interest in what it is I had to say, just leave me alone. Thanks very much. Academics
and that's happened.
Yeah. I have met several people. You can sit and look at them and go, yeah, you're just ticking a box. You're not willing to. The interesting thing that the discussions that we've had, the discussions that we have had today, and we will have in the future, is that you're open to looking at something in a different way, of going, yeah, I actually didn't think about that. That's why I don't have discussions with you because you're academics. I have discussions with you because you're decent human beings. That's the most important to me first. The fact of you may have 65 letters after your name at the end of it is fine for a dyslexic, but I don't. You follow? I'm not having this discussion because of that.
Sure.
The reason why I want to reach out to your students is because I'm not here to make their opinions. The opinions, the quote from John F. Kennedy, opinions are knowledge in the making. I'm here to help them form their opinions themselves by giving them sufficient information of which to make that opinion. And you buy coffee.
I buy dinner.
I'm never going to live this one down.
I mean, I feel like this is a big question. So, as if the others have been...
Yeah, so the others have been light-hearted.
Yeah, I mean, our previous conversation was that there's nothing. Do you you think that there should be an alternative to the current prison model? And the big question, what would you suggest as a potential alternative?
Thomas Paine said in one of his quotes, part of the quotes were, when the prisons are empty, then can a country be proud of its constitution. When the streets are empty of beggars, when the people are not taxed beyond oppression, then can a country be of happy or be successful. A good jail, the abolitionists would say to you, a good jail is an empty jail. There is a need for jail.
Yeah.
So the model, put me in front of HMPPS and the Ministry of Justice and I'll tell you what the model should be. But above all things, jails should be decent, and jails should be safe, and jails should be clean. Rory Stewart, who was one of the prisons ministers, said this when he went to look at Liverpool jail when it was at its worst. And he said that there was no need for a prison to be dirty, regardless of whether it was Victorian or new. And as much as Rory and I won't agree on several things, I happen to agree with him on that. So that's what a prison model needs to be.
Yeah.
A prison needs to be clean, it needs to be safe, it needs to be decent, and it needs to be new. We should raise all Victorian prisons to the ground.
Yeah.
They're not fit for purpose. But the prison model, that's a completely different thing. That's far too long to go
Since we
through.
have them, they should be as good as they can be.
Correct, and they're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm going to change it slightly.
Go for it.
Again, this was a topic which people were interested in. When someone's been given a very long sentence and they arrive in prison, how do you give them hope?
Politicians would say to you that hope is the golden thread that runs through everything. You have to give people hope. Long-term sentence prisoners. So in my country of birth, a long-term sentence prisoner is somebody who's doing more than 4 years in jail. Fortunately, the sentences are growing. So long-term sentences now go from 4 to 10 to 15 to 20. I have one of the lads that I work with, and actually as I'm talking to you, I can answer your question, because one of the guys that I work with in one of my jails has just been sentenced to 21 years. How do you give him hope of what it's going to be like in 10 and a half years when he's released from custody? I've met young lads who have been sentenced to horrendously long sentences. So kids are 16, 17 years of age, sentenced to 20 to 25 years. And all I have to say to them is that God love them, because I can't help them. I can only say to them that this too shall pass, and that they will be released one day. I can't sit and induct them into a jail and say to them, this is how your canteen works, and this is when your library works, and you can get your gym on Friday at 5 o'clock. My true belief, Gavin, is that these people that are coming to jail for those sentences need to go through some sort of bereavement counselling and grieving counselling, because they're grieving for the life that they've just lost. So how do you give them hope? You surround them with the people that can help them get through their days. And I think it is vitally important that we go back to the mental health issue, that within the first 24 hours, somebody who's been sentenced to an enormous or a length of time is seen by a mental health specialist. That my fellow prisoners can help you as you adjust to prison life, but we can't help you what's going on inside your head at that time. And to give them hope, there should be a sign outside jail that says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Dante's lines are just never more true when you're sitting outside a jail looking at a 20-year sentence. There is no hope, Gavin. I wish I could make it uplifting for you and make everybody's heart bleed with joy. I just genuinely can't. There is no hope. I can just make sure that you survive, because that's what prison life is these days, Gavin. It's about survival. When you're looking at a 20-year sentence, you just need to learn how to survive.
Well, at my age, if I was given life sentence with a 20, 30-year tariff, chances are
you'll die in jail.
Prison.
Correct.
And then on the other side of it, if I was given a 20-year sentence, that's the main part of my life.
Correct.
That's a big...
I lost my whole work, or my whole issue with the criminal justice when I went to jail. My whole sentence, I lost my 40s. I got arrested on my 40th birthday and I got released on my 50th.
Yeah.
I lost a decade of my life. These guys are losing 2 to 3 decades of their life. How do you get around it?
And how, sorry, this isn't a question, but I think it's something that intrigues me about this, is how did you cope with how the world had changed in the difference? Because I'm thinking even if you were sentenced, 2013, 2014 and released now, how would you cope, new money, the idea of iPhones, Brexit, things like that?
iPhones you can get in jail. Jessica, don't worry about it. Sorry. Unofficially, of course.
How did you cope with the world being a potentially different place with you?
I was okay because I wasn't incarcerated for a total of 10 years. It was just as the whole thing started. So I was incarcerated for 4.5 and 5 years. There is a strong answer for that of the man who, a friend of mine who's a prison group director for the Southwest, met, who had done 61 years in jail and was due to be released. And you're thinking, whoa. So it's a case of what this prison group director done and the prison governor, they showed extreme decency.
Yeah.
They took him out on an escorted release and showed him where he was going to be living when he got released. So there used to be, again, this all goes by the wayside, but there used to be almost a rule that if you'd done 10 years in jail, you got an escorted day release out of jail to see what society was like. Because you're right, smartphones didn't exist. Yeah. Bloody good thing, but they didn't exist. ATMs, the stuff like McDonald's counters, hell, McDonald's didn't exist when this man went to jail.
Even things like our notes have changed.
Yeah.
The coins look different, notes have changed, political parties have shifted, you might have been in prison when we were still in the EU, and now you've been released and we're not. And, how do you cope with...
So there is that word resettlement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what they're supposed to be doing.
Actually, this leads into a question as well, Michael, which is one of the students asked. Does Michael concur that once an offender has served their sentence, their punishment should be over? If so, is asking people to declare past convictions on job applications, quote, perpetuating prejudices and a constant reminder and barrier in their attempt to go forwards?
All right, so at the moment, if you're determined sentence, prior to the law changing just recently, you spent half your time in custody and half your time on licence. And during that time on licence, you were able to be recalled at any given time. So the prison sentence, or the punishment, as the person who gave the question asked, the punishment isn't actually over until the prison sentence is over, and that means when your licence is finished. So you're basically released halfway through, and that halfway through was purely to ease overcrowding. That's why I came in, for no other reason. Is society right in the way that it handles me? No, it's completely wrong. I am an ex-prisoner, and therefore I am an ex-prisoner for the rest of my life. So I'm labelled a criminal for the rest of my life. There are still things that I can't do now because I've had a jail sentence. My convictions when I go for a DBS check will never be spent because I was committed to over 4 years in jail. So for your person that asked the questions, if you're doing under 4 years, your convictions will eventually be spent and not show on any job application. There is a tremendous amount of good organisations out there that have done what's called ban the box. And that is basically the fact of you do not have to declare your convictions when you apply, so at least it gets you to the interview. During the interview stage, you have to declare your convictions, but at least it gets you through the front door. Society is completely wrong in the way that it does. I think that for the safety of society, there are certain convictions that shouldn't ever be spent. There are certain things that somebody may have done in their life that should forbid them from ever working with children again. So I don't think you should kind of wipe the slate clean, as it were. So I think that it is right that some convictions are there, but it is so detrimental to so many other people. I could never sit in a jury, ever. Oh, of course, I'd let everybody free. But things like that, I could never, some of the things that make me a member of society. Remember, society sent me to jail. But society also then said, I'm now cured, so I can come back. Society then bans me from actually taking part in some of the stuff. So it's a difficult question. There's some great organisations out there. There's some great, I think it's is it somebody, Chris Stacey, that runs that Unlock thing, that talks about being spent convictions. So there are some of the convictions that are now saying, okay, after X amount of years, they don't exist anymore.
How about you? Have you got more questions?
I've got one question which
Yeah.
is quite topical, very topical. COVID in prisons. So, kind of a few questions here. At the start of the pandemic, there were warnings of thousands of deaths in the prison system, which weren't unjustified, looking at kind of how pandemics worked, but we have had less than 50. Obviously, the way in which prisons dealt with it, you could argue as a success. You know, only 50 deaths. You know how I feel about deaths in prison.
Correct.
It came as a cost, but was it the right policy, how we dealt with COVID in prison? So locking them down, ending visits, things like that. Bearing in mind, obviously, you're balancing a pandemic that we had kind of arguably not much knowledge about.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
You had to lock the prisons down.
Yeah.
You had to keep the residents safe.
Yeah.
COVID entered prisons by the staff bringing it in. It didn't enter prisons by the prisoners because they were already there. It may have entered, you could say, that if somebody was remanded to jail, then he was a COVID carrier. But when you look at the CCAT jails, the long jails that had got COVID in them, or the BCAT long-term jails, it was brought in by staff. So I've read so much things on social media about the families, crying their hearts out, and they're quite right, that they couldn't hug their loved one. But I have to come back with the argument going, you can't, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But and it breaks my heart, because how do you stop a baby from running up to their dad and hugging him? How do you get a baby to understand that they're not allowed to do that?
Especially small children.
It's heart-wrenching. It's absolutely heart-wrenching. But you can't. Because one touch, the argument I had with one guy on Twitter was, he was saying, well, even if I just hugged my son for 30 seconds, and my argument was, well, COVID doesn't have a time watch. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't say, okay, I'm going to infect you at 31 seconds, so at 30, you're all right. So the prisons, they did lock them down, and they did it correctly. I think my controversial comment coming up, I think I'm really tired of hearing prison governors, not necessarily the governors, the higher echelons, of saying, the prisoners have adapted to it really well. We thought there was going to be more violence, but there wasn't. The prisoners have adapted to it really well. Bollocks. We adapted it to it really well because you forced us to.
Yeah.
We didn't do it out of choice. So we didn't adapt to it really well. We did it because you forced us to do it. And your prisons run with our assent, not consent. We don't consent to be here. We don't want to be in your jails. But we assent to you putting rules upon us. And as long as you treat us decently and safely, we will allow you to put these rules upon us. So you locked us up for 23 hours a day. What option did we have? Yeah. You have the keys, we don't. But we get it. But don't use, the prisoners handle it really well because they can see it on the television and they can see how bad it is on the outside. We generally don't really care. I'm sorry, and it's not a comment that anybody wants to hear, but it's the one that I'm going to make. Is that, we handled it because you forced us to. We didn't have an option. The self-harm has reduced. We talked about this earlier. The violence has reduced to a certain amount, but it started again. Prisoner-on-prisoner assaults. So it's jail. We kind of expect you to throw things at us. So did the prison service handle it initially in the beginning really well? Yeah, I think they did. I think that COVID is such a problem where there's these peaks and troughs of everything.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a problem now, isn't it?
Where visits are open one week and then they're shut down the next week. And again, it goes to that continuity thing.
Yes.
So certain prisons had these video calls, which are great. They're not video visits. They're not a visit. They're a call. I rally against this as well. Social media said, don't call them video visits. They're not. They're video calls. But what they didn't realise is we had a bit of an issue with self-harm after the video calls. Yeah. Because we were looking at our families at home. Yes. And going, why have you moved the television from the left corner to the right corner? Now that sounds really petty, doesn't it? But it's not that. It's the fact that life is going on without us. We're okay when you visit us in jail. We don't want to visit you at home.
I was going to say that's seeing into a home that you might not have seen for 5 years.
And may not see again for 5 years.
Yeah.
So, but the continuity thing was a problem because only certain prisons had that ability to do the video calls. So the one thing, again, that I wear my little saltire with pleasure on is the fact of Scotland opened them all up at the one time. Scotland turned around and said, you know what, there's 16 jails in Scotland. On Friday, 16 jails will have video calls. Because why is it fair that you could see me on a video call, but Gavin couldn't see his brother because he was in a different jail? So that's that continuity thing that we were talking about before. So I think the jails have handled them properly.
Yeah.
I think now it's a case of, whilst they're in the stages that they're in, they're still governed by the higher echelons in London. So they don't have control over their own jails, and I think the sooner the governors can get control over their own jails, the better they're going to be.
Do you think it's a case of also, and this is not generally something I consider, is a little bit of compassion for a service that is dealing with a pandemic? You know, we don't get pandemics. The entire country's had to adapt, and actually, for what they had, they did well.
I think so. I think that, yes, they were expecting mass amounts of deaths.
Yeah.
And luckily they didn't. Any death is a sad affair. I listened to one governor doing an interview on his television channel in his jail that said the deaths that we've had inside the prisons are negligible. Yeah, well, at that point my TV screen was full of Rice Krispies and cornflakes because I just spat it out of my mouth. That's just the most harsh and inhumane comment I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah.
I know what he meant, though.
He meant there's not.
He meant that it's not the 300 that we thought.
Yeah.
So therefore, against that. But it's, again, it's the way you say it.
Yeah.
It's perhaps he could have said it a different way.
But that's going back to that goes back to that whole idea of humane safety and decency. It's not just prisons themselves, it's the way we talk about them. We have to talk about them in a decent way because these are still human beings.
I think that the way they've handled it, the way that the governors have handled COVID and are continuing to handle COVID, there are certain jails in the country now that are deemed to be outbreak sites.
Yeah.
And here's the dedication. I know of one prison governor that stayed in his jail for 14 days. He didn't leave.
So that he wasn't.
No, so that he managed the situation himself. There's the dedication for you. So yeah, they have managed it as well as they could.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that, to be fair.
I'm slightly conscious of time. I would
Go for
like
it.
to ask a question about COVID as well, just following on from this. The very start, so mid-late March, when there was this massive concern amongst the public health authorities, amongst prison authorities, was there also genuine fear on the part of prisoners?
Yes. It was a pandemic.
It seems to have been reported that there was quite a lot of fear of the I mean, think how much scared we were of family we couldn't talk to.
It was, so the biggest thing for a prisoner, for fear of the prisoner, is the fear of the unknown. So it's like, okay, what are you going to do? How are we going to do it? And so it was for the prisoners. They were petrified for their own lives, and obviously for the lives of their loved ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, so here's the throwaway comment: "Give me a Sudoku. It's not the way you're going to help me go through COVID. Don't give me a distraction pack or £5 extra on phone credit. No, that's not going to help me through it. Sit and talk to me. Do what we were talking about before." So, and some jails have done it. You know, some jails went out on their own TV channel. They interviewed the governor every single day, and he would sit and talk to the prisoners. And it got to the stage that this governor was getting requests from prisoners as a shout out. "Governor, can you give a shout out to B-Wing, please?" And they go, "Hello, B-Wing." Right? See what you've just done?
Yeah.
That's what that does. That makes them laugh. That governor should be rewarded beyond belief. So yeah, there was, Gavin, there really was, and there still is. And I think the more you get to an unlock stage, and an unlock situation, the more stressful it's going to be for these guys.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be, we're never going back to normal, boys. It's not like, can I get back to the workshop? Because I used to work in workshop 6, so can I get back to the workshop? That's just not going to happen anymore. That's going to be another thing that we have to watch, is that we have to, the new normal, stupid words, isn't it? But we have to now get the lads into the understanding this is, and they're now, it's the strange and the sad thing is, you're going to have to do it now. You're going to have to start getting these lads used to what's going to be happening. Again, for a prisoner, it's the fact of, as long as you tell us honestly what's going to be happening, we're usually going to be okay with that. Don't and try and pull the wool over our eyes, you're going to have a problem with us.
We've covered a lot of ground, guys. I think this might be a good point to bring the discussion to an end.
Perfect.
Is there anything you want to say, Michael, before we finish?
No, just to everybody who watches this, thank you so much for your questions.
Yes, thank you. We've got a lot of questions from students and we're really grateful.
Keep them coming.
Yes.
Ask me anything that you want to ask, and I'll always give you a truthful answer. It may not be the answer that everybody expects or everybody wants, but as you know me, as we go along, I'm not scared of giving you the awkward answers. I'm here to be a thorn in the side of people that shouts and screams at them, and asks them to think of things differently. And that's what hopefully these little interviews do. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.